I would need a groom for that. The words were soft enough that only 3 people in the dressing room heard them, but they seemed to travel farther than the music, farther than the laughter spilling through the walls of the Grand Aurelia Hotel, farther than the Crystal Ballroom, where 200 donors were waiting for Evelyn Hart to walk out in white and smile like her life had not just been arranged for her. Where in the world are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? Because somewhere, maybe late at night in a quiet kitchen, maybe early morning before work, someone watching this knows exactly what it feels like to stand in a room full of people and realize no one has asked what you actually want. Caleb Brooks had not come to the gala looking for trouble. He had come with a tool bag in one hand, his 8-year-old daughter Lila holding the other, and the tired patience of a man who had learned that life did not care how carefully you made plans. The babysitter had canceled 20 minutes before his shift. The lighting board on the East Stage had failed 40 minutes before the charity auction. And Hartwell Events, the company that signed his paycheck, had called the only facilities manager in Manhattan who could fix old wiring without turning a ballroom into a panic. Caleb had almost said no. He had promised Lila a quiet Friday night, frozen pizza, her favorite blue blanket, maybe half a movie before she fell asleep against his shoulder. But the rent was due Monday. Her art class deposit was already late, and men like Caleb did not have the luxury of refusing extra hours just because they were tired. So he put Lila in her yellow coat, packed her sketchbook and colored pencils, and told her the truth in the gentle way he always did. Daddy has to fix something for work. You can draw while I am there. The Grand Aurelia looked like a building that had never known struggle. Gold light poured over marble floors. White roses climbed the banisters. Women in gowns moved through the lobby like they belonged to another weather system, one where money kept every storm at a safe distance. Caleb walked past them in a dark work jacket, clean jeans, and boots polished more from habit than pride. A few people looked at him, then at Lila, then away. He noticed. He always noticed. But he had taught himself not to collect every small insult like a stone in his pocket. Some stones were too heavy to carry when you had a child holding your hand. Behind the ballroom, the air changed. The music became muffled. The perfume gave way to hot cables, dust, and the faint metallic smell of equipment pushed too hard. Caleb found the faulty panel, set Lila on a folding chair beside a rack of silk table linens, and got to work. She opened her sketchbook without complaint. That was what made him look at her twice. Lila was usually full of questions. Tonight, she was quiet, turning the pages of an old brown notebook she carried everywhere, the one that had belonged to her mother, Maya Brooks. Maya had designed wedding gowns before she got sick. Not famous gowns, not the kind that appeared in magazines. She made dresses for school teachers, nurses, widows getting a second chance, women who saved for months just to feel beautiful for one day. Caleb used to tease her that she could make a bride out of a curtain and a prayer. Maya would smile and say, "A dress does not make a bride, Caleb. Joy does." He had not heard that voice in 3 years. Then a door opened at the end of the service hall, and Caleb heard a woman say, "I cannot breathe in this thing." It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of sentence people say when they are 1 second away from breaking, but still too proud to let anyone see it. Caleb looked up. Through the half-open door of a private dressing room, he saw Evelyn Hart standing before a full-length mirror in a white bridal gown, her dark hair pinned perfectly, her shoulders straight, her face composed in the way powerful people learn to compose themselves when weakness would cost too much. Everyone in New York knew Evelyn Hart, CEO of Hartwell Events. 41 years old. Built like ice, some said. Brilliant, others admitted. The kind of woman who could walk into a room of older men and leave with the contract, the building, and the room itself. But in that mirror, she did not look cold. She looked trapped. A stylist fussed near her hem. Her assistant, Nora Fields, stood nearby with a phone pressed to her chest, worry written all over her face. Evelyn lifted her eyes and saw Caleb in the reflection. For half a second, neither of them spoke. Caleb immediately looked away. "Sorry, ma'am. I am just here for the lighting panel." "Of course," Evelyn said, her voice returning to its polished shape. "Everything is always breaking 5 minutes before people expect me to smile." It was meant to be nothing. A passing line. But something in it sounded too honest. Lila slid from her chair and stepped closer, clutching Maya's sketchbook. Her eyes were fixed on the gown. Caleb reached for her shoulder, but she whispered before he could stop her. "Daddy, why does that look like Mommy's drawing?" The room went still in a way Caleb felt before he understood. Evelyn turned slightly. Nora glanced down at the notebook in Lila's hands. Caleb saw the embroidery then, the curved pattern along the bodice, the tiny vine of silver thread crossing the waist like moonlight over water. His breath caught. He knew that line. He had watched Maya draw it at their kitchen table at 1 a.m., her fingers smudged with pencil, her tea going cold beside her. He forced his face to remain calm because Lila was watching him, and because grief, when it returned in public, had a way of making a man feel exposed. Evelyn looked at Caleb as if she wanted to ask a question but did not know which one would hurt less. To soften the moment, to give his daughter something lighter to hold, Caleb managed a small, careful smile and said, "Well, Ms. Hart, you would make a great bride." He meant it kindly. Nothing more. A human sentence in an inhuman room. Evelyn stared at him through the mirror. For the first time that night, the corner of her mouth lifted, not for the cameras, not for the donors, not for the family waiting outside to announce a future she had not chosen. For one fragile second, she looked almost like herself. Then she answered, "I would need a groom for that." Caleb did not move. Nora stopped breathing. Lila looked from one adult to the other, too young to understand the weight of the sentence, but old enough to feel that something had shifted. And just beyond the dressing room door, footsteps approached across the marble hallway, slow and expensive, belonging to a man who believed the bride, the company, and the night were already his. Preston Vale stepped into the doorway with the calm of a man who had never needed to knock. The music from the ballroom rolled in behind him, smooth jazz and polite laughter slipping through the walls like a reminder that 200 people were waiting only 50 feet away. Marble in the hallway caught the gold light from the chandeliers and threw it across his tuxedo, across Evelyn's white gown, across Caleb's work boots beside the open lighting panel. For a second, no one moved. Preston looked first at Evelyn, then at Caleb, then at Lila, who still held Maya's sketchbook against her chest. His smile stayed in place, but something in his eyes cooled. "I was told you needed a moment," he said. "I did not realize the moment included backstage staff." Caleb felt Lila shift closer to his leg. He did not answer. He had learned a long time ago that some sentences were not questions. They were traps with good manners. Evelyn turned from the mirror, one hand closing unconsciously around a fold of the gown near her waist. The fabric tightened under her fingers before she noticed and let it go. "Mr. Brooks is repairing the lighting issue," she said. "The auction cannot begin if the east stage goes dark." Preston nodded as if he accepted the explanation, though his eyes never fully left Caleb. "Of course. Then we should let him return to the work he came here to do." His voice was polite enough for a boardroom, cold enough for everyone in the dressing room to understand the line he was drawing. Nora Field stood near the vanity with Evelyn's phone in her hand, watching the exchange the way someone watches a glass balanced too close to the edge of a table. "Preston," she said carefully, "Evelyn just needs another minute before the announcement." "The investors are already seated," Preston replied. "Your mother is managing questions from the press, and the board expects us to present a united front. Tonight." At the word mother, Evelyn's eyes moved toward the ballroom doors. The laughter outside swelled, followed by a burst of applause for something she had not heard. Her face remained composed, but Caleb saw the flicker beneath it. Responsibility pulled at her from one side. Something quieter, something almost like escape, pulled from the other. Preston offered his hand. "They are waiting for you." Evelyn looked at his hand, but she did not take it right away. Lila looked up at Caleb and whispered, "Daddy." She looked sad. Caleb lowered his voice. "Sweetheart, not now. Like when you read Mommy's letters," Lila said, softer this time, and the innocence of it made the room feel smaller. Caleb's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in pain he did not want his daughter to see. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her without silencing her. Evelyn heard the words. For one brief moment, the CEO disappeared again, and a woman in an unwanted gown looked at a little girl holding a dead mother's notebook. Preston gave a small, controlled laugh. Children have a way of making every room about feelings. Charming, when the timing allows it. An inconvenience when it does not. Lila pressed herself against Caleb's leg. Caleb looked down first, making sure she was safe inside his calm. Only then did he raise his eyes to Preston. My daughter is not an inconvenience, sir. He said it quietly. No threat, no performance, just a line placed on the floor where no decent man should step. Preston's smile thinned, but he did not push further. No offense intended. Then none should be repeated, Caleb said. Nora looked away, but not before Caleb caught the smallest breath she released, as if someone had finally opened a window. Evelyn's hand returned to the gown, fingers brushing the silver vine along the waist. She looked at Caleb differently now, not like an employee caught in a private room, but like a man who knew how to protect without humiliating anyone. Preston turned back to her. Evelyn, this evening is not only about us. It is about stabilizing Hartwell's future. Your mother understands that. The investors understand that. I need to know that you do too. Evelyn's gaze drifted again toward the ballroom, where her name was probably glowing on a screen beside his. I understand what everyone expects. Good. He stepped aside, making room for her to pass, but the doorway felt less like an exit than a narrowing corridor. Caleb reached for his tool bag, ready to remove himself and Lila from a room that had become too delicate for a working man to survive in safely. Then Lila opened Maya's sketchbook. The old pages whispered under her fingers until she stopped near the middle. Her eyes moved from the drawing to Evelyn's gown, then back again. Slowly, she turned the notebook toward her father. Daddy, she said, barely above the music behind the wall, Mommy drew that. Caleb saw the curved silver pattern in pencil, the tiny moon flowers, the same sweep at the waist. The air left his chest, but his face stayed calm because Lila was watching him and grief needed a steady hand. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low. Mr. Brooks, what is that? Caleb looked at the page, then at the gown, then at his daughter's hopeful, frightened eyes. Carefully, he closed the notebook, not to hide the truth forever, but because some truths deserve to be lifted slowly, with both hands, before the wrong people tried to own them. Caleb kept his palm over the cover of the notebook as if the pressure of his hand alone could protect what was inside it. For 3 years, Maya's drawings had lived in their apartment like a quiet second heartbeat. They were not valuable in the way the people outside that room understood value. They were pencil lines on aging paper, measurements written in the margins, tiny notes about lace, thread, waistlines, sleeves, and the way fabric should move when a woman turned. But to Caleb, every page carried the shape of a woman who used to stand barefoot in their kitchen after midnight, dreaming with a pencil because dreams were cheaper than rent. Evelyn did not reach for the book. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Most people in her world took first and asked later. She simply stood there in the white gown, waiting for permission. It belonged to my wife, Caleb said. His voice was even, but Lila leaned closer to his leg because she knew him well enough to hear when evenness cost him something. She designed bridal gowns. Evelyn's eyes moved to Lila, then back to the notebook. Was she part of the Hartwell Design Archive? Caleb shook his head. No, ma'am. Maya worked out of a small studio in Brooklyn. Mostly local brides. Teachers. Nurses. Women from church. People who paid in installments and brought their mothers to fittings. A faint sadness crossed his face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. She never had a collection. Not officially. Nora stepped beside Evelyn, careful and alert. May I ask her full name? Maya Brooks. Nora typed it into her phone, her brow tightening. Caleb saw the professional part of her take over, the part trained to make sense of disasters before they reached a microphone. Evelyn was still looking at him, and for the first time since he had worked for Hartwell events, she did not look through him as part of the room's machinery. She looked at him like a man with a history. Mr. Brooks, she said, if that sketch matches this gown, I need to know. Caleb almost laughed, but there was no humor in him. Need. That was the word powerful people used when their questions became urgent. He thought of how carefully Maya had stored that last design, wrapped in tissue paper and hope, saying one day she might enter it in a bridal showcase if the medical bills eased up, if her strength returned, if tomorrow was kinder than today. Tomorrow had not been kinder. My daughter recognized it, Caleb said. That does not mean I am accusing anyone. Lila looked up quickly. But it is Mommy's. Caleb bent slightly, his voice low. Sweetheart. It is, she whispered, hurt gathering in her eyes. She drew the little moon flowers. She said they were for brides who had to find light in dark places. Evelyn's face changed at that. Slowly, as if some hidden latch inside her had opened. Her fingers touched the silver vine along the waist of the gown, not admiring it now, but questioning it. Outside, applause rose from the ballroom, then faded. Someone had made an announcement. Time was moving without them. Nora looked up from her phone. "Evelyn," she said. "Carefully. There is a vendor record from 6 years ago. A small Brooklyn studio. The assets were purchased after the owner passed away. It lists patterns, samples, unfinished sketches." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. He had signed those papers in a funeral fog, barely reading them, told by a broker that the studio owed back rent and that selling the remaining materials would help cover expenses. He remembered packing Maya's sewing machine into the back of his truck while Lila slept at Mrs. Alvarez's apartment. Too young to understand why her mother's studio smelled like dust and lavender, but her mother was not there. "Who bought them?" Evelyn asked. Nora swallowed. "One of our subcontracted design houses. Bellamy White." They later became part of Hartwell's preferred vendor list. The name meant nothing to Caleb. That almost made it worse. The wound had a paper trail, but no face. Evelyn looked down at the dress again. The gown that had been chosen to present her as a symbol of elegance, stability, and family unity now seemed to weigh more than fabric should. "I did not know," she said. Caleb believed her. He did not know why, but he did. Maybe because her voice had lost all performance. Maybe because shame, real shame, had a silence around it that could not be faked. "I am not saying you did." Preston's voice returned from the hallway before his body did. "Evelyn, your mother is asking what exactly is taking so long." He stepped in, saw the faces, and immediately understood that the room had shifted without his permission. His eyes dropped to the notebook under Caleb's hand. "What is this now?" Nora answered before Caleb could. "A possible design attribution issue." Preston stared at her, then laughed softly. "Tonight? You want to discuss attribution tonight?" Evelyn turned toward him. "If the gown I am wearing came from work that was not properly credited, yes." "It is a dress," Preston said. "A beautiful dress, certainly, but still a dress. Do not let a facilities employee and a child turn a business event into a sentimental audit." Caleb felt Lila flinch against him. That was the moment his patience changed shape. It did not become anger. Anger would have been easy, and easy things were rarely safe for men like him in rooms like this. Instead, something steadier rose in him. He stood tall, one hand still resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. "My wife's name was Maya Brooks," he said. The room quieted around the name. She was not an audit. She was not a sentimental detail. She was a woman who worked until her hands cramped because she believed every bride deserved to feel seen, whether she had $50,000 or $500. Preston's expression tightened, but Caleb continued, his voice calm enough to make every word land clean. "I came here to fix lights. I did not come here to embarrass anyone. But my daughter will not stand in a room and hear her mother's work spoken of like it is nothing." Evelyn looked at Lila then, really looked at her, at the small girl holding grief and pride in the same trembling hands. Something in Evelyn's posture softened, not weakness, but recognition. She had spent the evening being treated like a contract in a white gown. Lila had spent 3 years carrying her mother in a brown notebook. And Caleb, standing between both of them, was not trying to own the moment. He was only refusing to let love be erased from it. From the ballroom, Margaret Hart's voice floated nearer, elegant and strained. "Evelyn, darling, the guests are waiting." Evelyn did not answer right away. Her eyes were still on Caleb. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "would you let me see the drawing?" Caleb looked at Lila. This time, he did not decide for her. Lila hugged the notebook to her chest for one long second, then opened it with careful fingers and turned it toward the woman in the white dress. Evelyn looked down at Maya's sketch, then at the gown she was wearing, and the last trace of color left her face. The silver vine, the moonflowers, the exact curve at the waist. The truth was no longer a feeling. It was right there on the page. Evelyn stared at the sketch until the lines seemed to lift from the page and wrap themselves around her waist. The silver vine, the moonflowers, the soft curve designed to make a bride look as if she were walking through a night garden. It was all there, drawn in Maya Brooks's hand years before Evelyn ever stepped into the gown. She turned slowly toward the mirror. For the first time that evening, she did not see a CEO preparing to lead a gala. She saw a woman arranged under lights, wrapped in someone else's stolen tenderness, polished into a symbol for investors who wanted certainty more than truth. From the ballroom, applause rose suddenly, bright and impatient. Evelyn flinched before she could stop herself. Preston noticed. So did Margaret Hart, who entered the dressing room with diamonds at her throat and concern sharpened into command. "Evelyn, darling," Margaret said, crossing to her daughter as if the room belonged to her. "The guests are waiting." Her eyes swept over Caleb, Lila, Nora, the open notebook, then returned quickly to the gown. She lifted the delicate edge of Evelyn's veil and adjusted it near her shoulder, a mother's gesture made strange by urgency, as if she were putting her daughter back into position. Evelyn caught her reflection again. Margaret behind her, Preston near the doorway, Caleb and Lila standing off to the side with Maya's notebook between them and the floor. "Mother," Evelyn said, "this design may belong to Mrs. Brooks." Margaret's fingers paused at the necklace clasp. Only for a second. Then she finished straightening it. "Then we will have counsel review it after tonight." Preston stepped closer to the doorway, not blocking it completely, but enough to make time feel guarded. "Exactly. There is a sequence to handling matters like this. First, we stabilize the company. Then we investigate." Lila's hand tightened around the notebook. Caleb rested his palm lightly on her shoulder, steady but not pulling her back. He wanted her protected, not taught to hide from the truth. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom again. Somewhere out there were employees whose mortgages depended on Hartwell, board members watching the debt numbers, reporters waiting for the engagement photo, and her mother carrying her father's legacy like a fragile vase no one was allowed to set down. But in front of her stood a child holding proof that another woman's dream had been folded into that legacy. Without a name, Margaret softened her voice. "Your father built this company from borrowed chairs and church basements. He sacrificed everything so you would not have to watch it fall apart over a misunderstanding." Caleb spoke then, quiet enough that everyone had to listen. "I understand carrying things, Mrs. Hart." Margaret looked at him. He kept his voice even. "I carried my wife when she was too tired to walk. I carried boxes from her studio after she was gone. I carry rent, school forms, grocery bags, and questions my daughter should not have to ask this young." He glanced at Lila, then back at Evelyn, not accusing, only present. Heavy does not always mean right. The words did not break the room. They settled into it. Evelyn's eyes lowered to the moon flowers at her waist. Preston's jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you are risking a $200 million commitment over something no one has verified." Nora lifted her phone slightly. "I can pull the purchase records." Margaret turned to her. "Not now." Evelyn did not move at first. Her breath was shallow, her hand still on the gown, her face caught between the woman her family needed and the woman she feared she had stopped being. Then she looked at Lila, not at the notebook. At Lila. "Nora," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but clear, "get the records." Preston stared at her. "You are confusing value with price." Evelyn looked at him then, and the first trace of strength returned to her face, not dramatic, not complete, but real. "No," she said. "I think I am finally learning the difference." Another wave of applause rolled through the wall, louder now, demanding the bride. Evelyn turned toward the sound, touched the necklace Margaret had just straightened, and let her hand fall. "Then they are going to wait for the truth." Nora moved quickly, not with panic, but with the precision of someone who had spent years making impossible rooms function. Her thumbs flew across her phone while her eyes moved from Evelyn to the hallway, measuring how much time they had before the ballroom's patience became a public problem. "I can access the vendor archive," she said. "But if Bellamy White filed the purchase through the old acquisitions portal, the records may be buried." Preston gave a quiet scoff. "Convenient." Caleb looked at him but did not answer. He had learned that some men wanted every silence filled because empty space made them nervous. Caleb was not nervous. He was tired, wounded in a place he had not expected to be touched tonight, but he was not nervous. Lila stood beside him with Maya's notebook pressed to her chest, her small shoulders straight in a way that reminded him painfully of her mother. Maya had been gentle, but she had never been weak. She could pin a hem with the focus of a surgeon and tell a rude client to leave her studio without raising her voice. Caleb used to love watching people underestimate her, then slowly realized the softness was only the surface. Evelyn stepped closer to Lila, lowering herself slightly so she was not towering over the child in the white gown. "May I ask you something?" Lila glanced at Caleb first. He nodded. Did your mother name this design? Evelyn asked. Lila opened the notebook again and turned back one page, then another. Her finger stopped at the top corner where Maya's handwriting curved across the paper. The night garden, she read. Her voice trembled on the last word. She said some flowers bloom when nobody is watching. Evelyn's eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, something in her had changed. The dress was no longer a costume for a business alliance. It was a borrowed dream, and the girl standing in front of her was the person who had paid the price for its silence. Margaret folded her hands. Evelyn, compassion is admirable, but leadership requires timing. Leadership requires truth, Evelyn said. Margaret's face hardened. Leadership requires survival. Caleb heard the history in that sentence. Not just fear for money, fear with roots. The kind passed from one generation to the next until everyone called it wisdom. Evelyn heard it too. Her expression softened toward her mother, but she did not retreat. Survival cannot be the only thing we teach people to do. Preston stepped between them, careful not to come too close, careful to keep his voice low enough to seem reasonable if anyone overheard. This is emotional manipulation. A grieving man, a child, a sketchbook, a dramatic coincidence. Evelyn, you are smarter than this. Caleb felt Lila's hand tighten around his sleeve. That was enough. He looked down at her, then back at Preston. My daughter is not a tactic. Preston turned to him slowly. No one said she was. You did, Caleb said. Just in better shoes. The silence that followed was complete. Nora looked down to hide the smallest flicker of a smile. Evelyn did not smile, but her eyes moved to Caleb with something like gratitude and something more careful than gratitude. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of it. Caleb wished the moment had not happened. He did not enjoy putting a man in his place, especially in front of his daughter. But he needed Lila to know there were moments when dignity did not mean staying quiet. It meant speaking without becoming cruel. Nora's phone chimed. She read the screen, and the color drained slightly from her face. I found it. Evelyn turned. Read it. Nora hesitated. Evelyn. Read it. Nora drew a breath. 6 years ago, Bellamy White Design purchased remaining inventory from Maya Brooks' bridal studio after closure. Listed items include sample fabric, hand-drawn sketches, client files, and 3 unfinished signature concepts. One concept is titled The Night Garden. Lila made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a word. Caleb crouched beside her immediately. Breathe, baby. She shook her head, tears gathering but not falling. They took Mommy's garden. Caleb pulled her gently against him. No, sweetheart. They used it without saying her name. That is different. And now her name is here. He tapped the notebook with one finger. We still have it. Evelyn watched him comfort his daughter, and the contrast struck her so deeply she almost had to look away. Preston had spent months telling her what strength looked like. Leverage, control, winning before anyone else knew there was a contest. Caleb showed her something quieter. A man kneeling on a hotel carpet in work boots, teaching a grieving child how to tell the truth without letting it poison her. Margaret looked shaken now, though she tried to hide it. If this is accurate, the legal team can review it Monday. Evelyn laughed once, softly, but there was no humor in it. Monday. She looked toward the ballroom. They are about to auction scholarships for young artists while I stand on stage wearing the uncredited work of one. Preston's jaw tightened. Do not turn this into theater. It became theater the moment you put me in a wedding gown for investors. Margaret's eyes flashed. That gown was chosen because it represents stability. Evelyn looked at the mirror. For a long second, she studied herself, the silver moon flowers at her waist, the white fabric glowing beneath the dressing room lights Caleb had come to fix. Then she reached behind her neck and removed the diamond necklace her mother had fastened there an hour earlier. She placed it gently on the vanity. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. No, Evelyn said. It represents a woman whose name was removed. Preston took one step toward the door. If you walk out there and embarrass me, the offer is gone. Evelyn turned to him fully. Then it was never an offer. It was a leash. Caleb rose slowly, keeping Lila close. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know whether Evelyn Hart would truly choose the truth once the lights and cameras found her. But when she looked at him, she no longer looked like a woman waiting to be rescued. She looked like a woman remembering she could walk. Mr. Brooks, she said, I am going to say your wife's name in that ballroom. I will not do it without your permission. Caleb felt the weight of the question settle over him. Maya had wanted her work seen. But more than that, she had wanted it seen honestly. He looked at Lila. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve and nodded once. Caleb turned back to Evelyn. Say it right, he said. Her name was Maya Brooks. Evelyn nodded. Maya Brooks, she repeated, as if making a promise. Then she lifted the front of the gown just enough to walk, opened the dressing room door, and stepped toward the ballroom where everyone was still waiting for a bride. Evelyn did not look back until she reached the last turn before the ballroom. Behind her, the narrow service hallway opened into a wide marble corridor lined with white roses, gold-framed mirrors, and staff members pretending not to stare. Caleb followed several steps behind with Lila at his side, not because he wanted to be part of the moment, but because his daughter's hand was locked around his, and because Maya's notebook was still pressed against Lila's chest like something alive. Nora walked between them and the noise ahead, already speaking quietly into her phone, telling someone from the technical booth to delay the music, telling security that no one was to block Mr. Brooks, telling the auction chair that Evelyn Hart would be taking the stage alone. Preston caught up just before the ballroom doors. His face had lost its polished ease, but he was careful to keep his voice smooth. Men like him rarely raised their voices when control was still possible. Evelyn, he said, think very carefully. There are cameras in that room. There are reporters. There are investors who do not care about a dress from Brooklyn. Evelyn stopped. For a moment, Caleb thought she might turn away from the doors. Not because she was weak, but because the pressure around her was real. $200 million was not an abstract number. It was payroll, debt, office leases, contracts, hundreds of employees whose names she probably knew, and a family legacy that had been placed on her shoulders before she was old enough to understand its weight. Margaret stood behind Preston now, her expression tight with fear disguised as elegance. Your father built Hartwell from nothing, she said. Do not make his life's work smaller than one painful mistake. Evelyn turned then, slowly. That is what you still do not understand, she said. The mistake was making people smaller. No one answered. The ballroom doors opened before anyone could stop her, and the sound hit them like warm weather. Applause, silverware, soft jazz. The murmur of wealthy guests turning toward the woman in white. The grand Aurelia ballroom glittered under 1,000 lights. Round tables filled the room from the stage to the back wall. On a massive screen behind the podium, the words Hartwell Future Arts Gala glowed in gold. Beside them was a photograph of Evelyn smiling beside Preston, the kind of photograph chosen to make a business arrangement look like romance. The applause grew when the guests saw her. Then it faltered when they noticed she was alone. Caleb stayed near the side wall with Lila, half hidden behind a column wrapped in roses. He could see the stage clearly, but he kept his body angled slightly in front of his daughter, shielding her from the full attention of a room that had not earned the right to stare at her grief. Lila whispered, Is she really going to say Mommy's name? Caleb looked at Evelyn climbing the 3 steps to the podium. I think she is. What if they get mad? He looked down at his daughter. Then they get mad. Truth does not stop being true because a room is uncomfortable. Evelyn reached the microphone. For 3 seconds, she did not speak. Cameras lifted. Guests leaned forward. Preston entered through a side door and stood near the front. His smile returned now, though it looked thinner beneath the lights. Margaret sat at the family table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles paled. Nora stood near the technical booth, phone ready, eyes sharp. Evelyn looked at the screen behind her, at the photograph of herself and Preston, then back to the ballroom. Good evening, she said. Her voice carried cleanly through the speakers. Tonight was supposed to include an announcement. A pleased murmur moved through the room. Preston straightened. Evelyn let the sound rise just long enough for everyone to believe they knew what was coming. But before I say anything about the future of this company, I need to correct something from its past. The murmur changed. Caleb felt Lila lean against him. Evelyn placed one hand lightly at her waist, where the silver vine caught the light. This gown has been described tonight as a Hartwell original. It is not. A ripple moved across the tables. Evelyn continued before it could become noise. The central design was created by a bridal artist from Brooklyn named Maya Brooks. Lila's breath caught. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, and in the darkness behind them, he saw Maya at the kitchen table, pencil moving, tea untouched, hope still alive in her hands. Evelyn's voice softened, but did not break. Her work entered our vendor system after her studio closed, and somewhere along the way, her name was separated from her art. I do not yet know every person responsible for that, but I know enough to say this clearly. Hartwell benefited from work that should have been credited to her. The ballroom had gone completely still. It was not the stillness of boredom. It was the stillness of people realizing they were no longer watching ceremony. They were witnessing character. Preston stepped toward the stage, but Nora moved first, intercepting him with a calm word and a raised hand. Not forceful, not dramatic, just enough to remind him that the room was watching now. Evelyn looked toward the side wall. Her eyes found Caleb, then lowered to Lila. Maya Brooks left behind a daughter who still carries her sketchbook, she said, and a husband who came here tonight to fix our lights, not to expose our failures. Caleb felt the room turn slightly, searching. He did not move. He did not want applause. He did not want pity. He wanted Lila to hear her mother's name spoken correctly. Evelyn turned back to the guests. This gala raises money for young women in the arts. If we cannot honor one artist whose work is already standing under our lights, then every check written tonight is only decoration. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Margaret lowered her eyes. Preston's face hardened. But around the ballroom, something else began to happen. A woman at table 12 slowly set down her champagne glass. An older man near the front removed his glasses and looked at the gown as if seeing it for the first time. One of the scholarship students seated near the back wiped her eyes. Evelyn took a breath. So tonight, the first pledge will come from Hartwell itself. We are establishing the Maya Brooks Bridal Arts Fund for young designers who work unseen, unpaid, underestimated, or told their dreams are too personal to matter. Lila began to cry silently. Caleb knelt beside her, just enough to put his arm around her without pulling her out of the moment. She said it, Lila. Whispered. She said Mommy's whole name. Caleb's own voice was rough when he answered. Yes, baby. She did. On stage, Evelyn looked no longer like a bride being presented to investors. She looked like a woman who had stepped out of a role and into herself, with every light in the ballroom finally telling the truth. The applause did not come right away. For a few long seconds, the ballroom remained suspended between habit and conscience. People in rooms like that knew when to clap for generosity, when to laugh at a safe joke, when to rise for a donor whose name was printed on a wall. But they did not always know what to do when a woman in a bridal gown stood under perfect lights and admitted that the beautiful thing they had admired had been taken from someone without honor. Then, from the back of the room, one pair of hands began to clap. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. A young woman seated with the scholarship recipients stood slowly, her program folded against her chest, tears bright in her eyes. Another student stood beside her. Then an older seamstress from one of Hartwell's community partners rose near table 7. Within moments, the applause spread, uneven at first, then fuller, not the polished applause of wealthy people blessing themselves, but something more human. Caleb stayed crouched beside Lila, his arm around her shoulders, feeling each clap pass through the room like a door opening. Lila did not look proud exactly. Pride was too small a word for the ache on her face. She looked relieved, the way children look when they finally realize the grown-ups have not forgotten someone they loved. Preston did not clap. He stood near the front with his hands at his sides, his expression carefully controlled. When the applause grew, he leaned toward a board member and murmured something Caleb could not hear. Evelyn could. Her eyes shifted toward him for only a second, and whatever she saw there made her straighten even more. Thank you, she said into the microphone, and the room quieted again. But applause is not accountability. That sentence changed the temperature. Effective immediately, Hartwell Events will suspend all active work with Bellamy White pending a full review of design acquisition records. Any artist whose work was absorbed into our archive without proper credit or compensation will be identified, contacted where possible, and made whole. Nora, near the technical booth, nodded once as if she had already expected the order and was ready to make it real. Margaret lifted her face sharply. Preston's polite mask thinned. Additionally, Evelyn continued, the fund in Maya Brooks's name will not be symbolic. Hartwell will seed it tonight with $5 million, and I will personally match the largest pledge made before midnight. A sound moved through the ballroom. Not quite a gasp, not quite conversation. $5 million could make people generous very quickly, but Caleb heard something else beneath it: discomfort. Money was easy to celebrate when it moved from the powerful to the grateful. It was harder when it arrived with an apology attached. Lila looked at him. Is that a lot? Caleb brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. It is enough to help a lot of girls draw their dreams. She looked down at the notebook. Mommy would like that. Yes, Caleb said softly. She would. Preston finally moved. He walked toward the side of the stage, not rushing, because rushing would reveal too much. Evelyn, he said, low but close enough for the front tables to hear. Step away from the microphone. She looked at him. No, it was the smallest word she had spoken all night, and somehow the strongest. Preston's smile returned, thin as paper. Then I will make my position clear. Vale Capital will withdraw its commitment at the close of this event. A murmur ran through the room. Cameras turned. Margaret went still. Evelyn did not. She looked out at the tables, at donors, employees, students, artists, and executives who had come expecting a clean story and were now being asked to decide what kind of story they wanted to belong to. That is Mr. Vale's right, she said. Hartwell will not be purchased through pressure disguised as partnership. Preston's face tightened. Careful. Caleb rose without thinking, not to intervene, not to protect Evelyn as if she needed saving, but because Lila was watching a powerful man try to make truth seem dangerous. He would not let her learn the wrong lesson. Evelyn saw him stand, and her expression softened for half a breath. Then she turned back to Preston. I am being careful. For the first time tonight, I am being careful with the right things. The ballroom held its breath. Then the older man near the front, the one who had removed his glasses, stood up. Caleb recognized him from staff briefings. Arthur Bell, chairman of a regional arts foundation and one of the largest donors in the city. He buttoned his jacket slowly. Ms. Hart, he said, his voice carrying without a microphone. My foundation will make the first pledge. $2 million for the Maya Brooks Fund. A wave of whispers broke across the room. Before Preston could respond, a woman at table 4 stood. My company will add $1 million. Another donor stood near the center aisle. $500,000. Then another. $750,000. The numbers came not like charity tossed from balconies, but like witnesses stepping forward. Preston looked around as if the floor had shifted under him. The leverage he had carried into the ballroom was still real, but it was no longer the only power in the room. Evelyn's eyes glistened, though her voice remained steady. Thank you. Margaret slowly lowered herself into her chair, the certainty drained from her face. For the first time that night, she did not look like a woman protecting a legacy. She looked like a mother realizing she may have mistaken control for love. Lila tugged Caleb's sleeve. Daddy, people are helping. Caleb nodded, his throat tight. Sometimes they just need someone to tell the truth first. On stage, Evelyn looked again toward the side wall, toward the man who had come to fix lights, and the little girl who had carried a dead woman's dream into the brightest room in Manhattan. She did not smile for the cameras. She smiled at them, small and grateful, as if the room had disappeared for 1 second, and only the truth remained. Caleb gave the slightest nod, not ownership, not permission, only respect. And in that quiet exchange, something deeper than romance began to take shape, not a spark meant to burn fast, but a steady light, the kind a person follows when they are finally ready to walk out of the dark. The pledges continued until the numbers no longer sounded like rescue, but responsibility. One donor stood, then another. Then a woman from a community arts foundation pledged studio space for young designers who had never been able to afford Manhattan rent. Caleb stayed near the side wall with Lila tucked beneath his arm, grateful that Evelyn had not called them forward. She had said Maya's name without turning their grief into a performance, and that mattered more to him than every camera in the room. When the program finally ended, the Grand Aurelia Ballroom began to empty in slow, uneven waves. Chairs scraped softly. Glasses clinked. Guests who had arrived expecting an engagement announcement left whispering about vendor archives, stolen credit, and a black single father who had stood in silence while the truth found its own voice. Caleb was helping Lila into her yellow coat when Nora crossed the room quickly, her phone held tight in one hand. A gray-haired legal counsel followed a step behind her, his expression controlled but pale. Evelyn had just stepped down from the stage, still calm, still wearing the gown with Maya's moon flowers at her waist. Nora leaned close and spoke quietly, but the words carried enough for Caleb to hear the shape of them. Preston has formally withdrawn the investment. Effective immediately, two board members near the front table exchanged a look. One of them said, "We need a damage control call before midnight." Another murmured, "Payroll exposure, debt covenants, press cycle." For a moment, the old pressure returned to the room. Money, fear, survival, the machinery of consequence beginning to turn. Evelyn looked at the anxious faces around her, then down at the gown. "Schedule the call," she said. "But the first statement will name Maya Brooks correctly." The legal counsel hesitated. "Evelyn, the wording should be careful." "Careful is fine," she said. "Cowardly is not." Caleb looked away, not to hide emotion, but to give her the privacy of choosing the hard thing without needing applause for it. Preston left through the side aisle minutes later, his phone already at his ear, his face smooth enough to fool anyone who had not seen him lose control one quiet inch at a time. Margaret Hart remained seated near the family table until most of the guests were gone. When she finally approached Caleb and Lila, she stopped several feet away, as if she understood now that closeness had to be earned. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Caleb nodded. "Mrs. Hart." Her eyes moved to the notebook in Lila's hands, then dropped. "I spoke about your wife's work as if it were an inconvenience." The words seemed to cost her. "I was wrong. I am sorry." Caleb did not rush to soften it. An apology deserved room to stand on its own. "Thank you," he said. "Maya deserved better." Margaret's mouth tightened, not offended, but struck by the truth. "So did my daughter," she said, almost too quietly. Caleb did not answer. That repair was not his to perform. Evelyn approached then, but she kept a respectful distance, no closer than the edge of the column wrapped in roses. She had changed nothing about the night's consequences. She had only chosen which ones she was willing to face. "Caleb," she said, using his name carefully, as if asking permission with the way she spoke it. "I am sorry, not only for the dress, for the fact that your daughter had to carry proof into a room full of adults before any of us knew how to see it." Caleb met her eyes. There was no easy forgiveness in him, but there was no bitterness either. "Do not let sorry be the best thing Hartwell says about her." Evelyn nodded. "It will not be." Lila looked from her father to Evelyn, then down at the notebook. Caleb saw the decision forming in her small face and did not make it for her. "It is yours, baby," he said softly. "You choose." Lila opened the notebook with careful fingers and turned to a page near the back. She stepped forward just enough for Evelyn to see, holding the book like something sacred but not fragile. "You can look at this one," she said, "but only if you are careful." Evelyn lowered herself slightly, keeping her hands folded so she would not touch the page without permission. The sketch was unfinished, half a gown, half a garden, moonflowers climbing toward an empty shoulder. At the top, in Maya's pencil, were the words, "For the bride who finally smiles." Evelyn read them once. Then again. The empty ballroom seemed to fall quiet around the sentence. Caleb swallowed, his voice low when he finally spoke. Maya named everything she hoped would live. Evelyn looked at the sketch, then at Lila, then at Caleb, and the worry waiting for her after midnight did not disappear. The withdrawn investment was still real. The board was still anxious. Hartwell would still have to answer for what it had failed to protect. But Evelyn's voice was steady when she said, "Then we will make sure this one does." 3 months later, the sign above the narrow storefront in Brooklyn still made Caleb stop for a second every morning before he unlocked the door. Maya Brooks Bridal Art Studio. The letters were simple, painted in warm gold against deep green, nothing flashy, nothing trying too hard. That was how Maya would have wanted it. Inside, sunlight crossed the hardwood floor in long bright strips, falling over work tables, fabric rolls, framed sketches, and one small corner where Lila kept her colored pencils in a chipped blue mug. The studio did not feel like a shrine. Caleb had made sure of that. Grief could live there, but it could not own the place. There was laughter now. There were women standing before mirrors with their mothers crying softly behind them. There were young designers from the new Maya Brooks Bridal Arts Fund coming in twice a week to learn pattern drafting, beadwork, and the business side of surviving as an artist. Hartwell had done what Evelyn promised. The review uncovered 12 designers whose work had been misfiled, underpaid, or absorbed without proper credit. Some mistakes were old. Some were careless. A few were worse than careless. Evelyn did not hide behind a statement. She hired outside auditors, paid settlements, ended Hartwell's relationship with Bellamy White, and built a public archive that named every artist attached to every design. Preston Vale withdrew his investment before sunrise the morning after the gala. For 2 weeks, business reporters predicted Hartwell would collapse. It did not. Arthur Bell's foundation led a new funding round built around transparency and arts education, and the scandal that should have buried Evelyn became the line she refused to cross. Margaret Hart came to the studio once, standing awkwardly near the doorway with a box of Maya's recovered materials in her hands. She apologized again, this time without diamonds, without an audience, without needing Caleb to make it easier for her. Lila accepted a spool of silver thread from the box and said, "Mommy would not want you to be sad forever." Margaret cried quietly after that. Caleb pretended not to notice, because some people deserved privacy when they finally became human. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, the studio held its first student showcase. No chandeliers, no marble ballroom, just folding chairs, lemonade, paper cups, neighborhood families, and a row of unfinished gowns displayed on plain dress forms. Lila had insisted on hanging her favorite drawing near the front window. It showed a woman in a white dress covered with tiny moonflowers, smiling beneath a garden of stars. At the bottom, in careful purple marker, she had written, "The bride who finally smiled." Evelyn arrived 10 minutes before the showcase began, wearing a cream coat and carrying flowers from a corner market, not the kind wrapped by a private florist. She paused when she saw the drawing. Caleb watched her from the cutting table, a measuring tape around his neck because one of the students had asked him to help pin a hem. "You came," Lila said, running to her. Evelyn smiled. "I promised I would. Daddy says promises matter more when nobody makes you keep them." Evelyn looked at Caleb. "Your daddy is right about a lot of things." Caleb shook his head slightly, but he was smiling. There had been phone calls since the gala, then meetings, then coffee that was supposed to be about scholarship logistics, and somehow lasted 2 hours. Nothing rushed. Nothing announced. Caleb had moved carefully, not because he was afraid of love, but because he respected the size of what both of them carried. Evelyn had never tried to buy her way into their lives. She showed up. She listened. She asked about Maya, without making the questions heavy. She learned that Lila hated peas, loved charcoal pencils, and still slept with a nightlight shaped like a moon. She learned that Caleb took his coffee black, fixed loose cabinet hinges without being asked, and went quiet whenever he was feeling too much. And Caleb learned that Evelyn Hart, away from cameras and boardrooms, was not cold at all. She was a woman who had spent so many years being useful that she had nearly forgotten how to be wanted simply for herself. Near the end of the showcase, after the students had spoken and Lila had proudly explained the moonflowers to anyone who would listen, Evelyn stood beside Caleb at the window. Outside, Brooklyn moved in its ordinary rhythm, traffic lights changing, a delivery truck idling at the curb, 2 kids racing scooters down the sidewalk. "I used to think a wedding dress was about the person waiting at the end of the aisle," Evelyn said softly. Caleb looked at the drawing. "Maya used to say it was about the woman walking down it." Evelyn smiled. She was wiser than most people I have known. She had a way of making simple things hard to argue with. They stood in comfortable silence. Then Evelyn said, "I still do not have a groom." Caleb turned to her, and the old joke returned between them, but it no longer carried the ache of a trapped woman in a hotel dressing room. This time it carried sunlight, thread, pencil dust, and a little girl laughing near the lemonade table. Caleb's smile was small, steady, and unafraid. "Maybe this time, you do not need one to prove you are worth choosing." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe not," she said, "but I would like someone who knows how to stand beside me." Caleb glanced at Lila, who was showing Margaret how to draw moonflowers on the corner of a napkin. Then he looked back at Evelyn. "Standing beside someone is serious work. I know. It takes patience. I am learning. And honesty." Her eyes softened. "Especially that." Caleb held her gaze, and for the first time in years, the future did not feel like a room he had to enter alone. He did not make a speech. He did not promise more than the moment could honestly hold. He only offered his hand, open and calm. Evelyn took it. Across the room, Lila looked up, saw them, and smiled in a way that made Caleb feel Maya's memory not as pain, but as blessing. The studio filled with evening light. The moon flowers on the drawing glowed softly by the window, and for once, every name that mattered had been spoken, every dream that had been stolen had been returned, and the woman who finally smiled was not the only one learning how to begin again.